After an entire decade of Five Nights at Freddy's, there's a lot of lore to unpack that millions of theorists have tried to solve. Although, I think I've actually solved it all. Today is the fourth part of this mini-series where we're solving the big one, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 from 2015, including the biggest question, what was or is in the infamous locked box. Each month will be dedicated to a single game until the big timeline video releasing December 19th at 5 PM UTC. So please subscribe so you don't miss an upload, and for us to hit 300k before the end of the year. Like the video and consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy, but in order to figure out which story I'm going to tell there, let's begin solving the timeline here. Although remember, as always, this is just a theory and my interpretation of the evidence. Even if you disagree, I hope it gives you something new to think about. So as we all know, this game has two entirely separate sections to cover, with a lot of lore within each. First, let's talk about the minigames, which tell us the story of Mike's younger brother, the Crying Child, and help set the stage for the gameplay. These minigames count down the days until the Crying Child's birthday party at Fredbear's family diner, being bullied constantly by his brother Mike, being left behind in the building, and scared by other employees. All while a mysterious Fredbear plush comforts him throughout and follows his every movement. Then party day arrives, and as we all know, he gets greeted and picked up by Mike and his bully friends, taking him to the stage and putting him inside Fredbear's mouth. Although the performance continues and Fredbear goes to sing, closing his mouth on the Crying Child's head. The next night we're then in the Void, where Mike apologizes to his brother before the Fredbear plush, with an interestingly different font now, tells the Crying Child that he'll put him back together, before we hear a heartbeat flatline and see the Crying Child fade away, simply signifying his death in the hospital. While the minigames are relatively straightforward, once you start looking into every single detail and hidden Easter egg throughout them, things start to get a lot more interesting. Especially considering this is the one game Scott himself confirmed, quote, "Most people assumed that I filled the game with random Easter eggs this time. I didn't," meaning that each and every Easter egg and reference is intentional and important. So now that I've given you a brief summary of the events that play out within them, let's rip these minigames apart for lore, starting with the biggest question from them: who is speaking through the Fredbear plush? The main theory that you've probably heard a million times before is that William is the one speaking through the plush, something I've believed over recent years too, mainly due to the following game's sister location showcasing a Fredbear plush inside of his private office. Although not only can that simply be where the plush was taken after the Crying Child's death, and is likely more tied to the experiments going down in there, but the theory also seems to disregard the fact that within the minigames we outright see William working and stuffing an employee into a suit while the Fredbear plush is currently talking to the Crying Child, making it impossible to be William. So what gives? Well, at the very start of the game itself, the plush interestingly appears in a black void with no white eyes, before gaining its white eyes that follow the Crying Child's movements throughout, also having its completely empty eyes in a few frames after this too, implying that this isn't just a regular toy and is instead something haunted, as every other time we've seen glowing white eyes in the story, it's always been a byproduct of possession, from the classics to the toys. In fact, it's even referencing a previous minigame, Save Them, where when we see the possessed Golden Freddy, he has dull black eyes. That is, until we walk towards him, where he then gains white eyes and teleports away. The other four plushies also don't have any white eyes either. And speaking of teleporting, the plushie appears to be teleporting too, even into places it shouldn't be, like the saws or the flowers, and at some points it isn't even visible on screen, such as while he's at Fredbear's, yet is still communicating to the Crying Child. We know that this isn't the case of a minigame inconsistency, where Scott is just implying that he's holding the plush and taking it everywhere he goes, simply because of the girl out front of Fredbear's, who specifically points out to us, "Where is your plush toy?" directly making us take note of the fact that it's not being held by the Crying Child, and cannot be seen following him. Since none of the details in this game are meant to be meaningless, this girl revealing that he's not carrying the plush with him, as well as no one else noticing it, the plush seemingly teleporting around everywhere, the apparently newly gained white eyes, speaking while William's shown to be working at the same time, and so likely every other day too, and even communicating to the Crying Child without being around him, all seems to be implying that this Fredbear plush isn't as simple as someone talking through it, and that it's instead haunted in some way. But as we learn through another Easter egg in these minigames, these all take place in 1983, and so this would be one of the first implications of possession in the entire timeline. So who or what in the world could this be? Well, I believe we can actually answer this by heading to the novel trilogy, where within an alternate universe, we see the aftermath of Charlie's death, where Henry pours all of his deep agony into a doll, which then gets called out to mean that he put a piece of himself inside of it, causing all of the robot Charlies to actually seem alive, despite not having a real soul attached to them. I believe that something similar is happening here with the Fredbear plush, where the constant bullying from Mike has caused the crying child to pour all of his agony into his best friend, the Fredbear plush, and eventually he puts enough agony inside of it to actually animate said plush, and have a piece of himself inside of it. This makes sense of why the plush can talk to him wherever he goes, almost as if it's within his thoughts, appears to have his memories by mentioning prior events, and is even trying to help him from Mike's bullying, which I don't see William Afton doing, as well as making sense of why the first ever lines from the Fredbear plush is, "He locked you in your room again. Don't be scared. I am here with you," directly referencing the fact that the bullying and his fears caused his imaginary best friend to turn real, and now appear by his side. Not only that, but within the survival logbook we even get a page featuring the Fredbear plush, where it specifically references a stuffed animal or an imaginary friend that may have been used in the face of extreme fear, with Cassidy then asking the crying child, "Does he still talk to you?" Which further reinforces this whole theory, since that statement implies it actually still can talk to him, and therefore it wasn't an actual person he was talking to. However, while this means the plushie throughout the real world minigames was an imaginary friend turned real from the crying child's agony, what if I told you that doesn't mean William never spoke through it? In the final minigame we're in the void, and the first line spoken is Mike from the real world, apologizing to him. Although when assumedly the Fredbear plush starts talking, it's interestingly a different hex color code to what it had been speaking in for the rest of the game, almost as if it's not the same thing, and is instead someone pretending to be him in this scene. If the first speaker in this cutscene came from the real world, then it would make sense that the final speaker would also come from the real world too, with "I will put you back together" directly implying supernatural shenanigans, and therefore making sense to be the work of William, which we then also see in Sister Location that after the crying child's death, William has the plush in his office, implying that he was the last person to have it. Also, not only does the final speaker state "I'm still here," which seems to be a direct callback to William saying "I am still here" in this FNAF 3 teaser, but in both Sister Location and Ultimate Custom Night, a game where it's specifically William's memories being flipped back onto him, we then have the final speaker's lines being directly hinted to be about William, through Mike stating,
"I put her back together, just like you asked me to."
And Nightmare Fredbear with,
"Let me put you back together, then take you apart all over again."
Which both reference the "I will put you back together" line, as well as,
"We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them,"
referencing the "We are still your friends" line. Not only that, but in FNAF AR Special Delivery, a recreation of Springtrap himself states,
"Let's see how many times you can be pulled apart and put back together again,"
to further hint at it. This then may be referenced later with the Fazbear Fright story, The Real Jake, where Jake believes that he's talking to a doll, Simon, while he's in hospital, although that doll is revealed to be his father speaking to him through a baby monitor next to it, a direct parallel to this theory, where a father is pretending to be a doll for his child while he's in hospital. What William means by "I will put you back together," as well as the haunted plushie's placement in William's office, leads to the beginnings of experiments that we'll learn about in the next video all about Sister Location, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. But besides being the cause of future experiments, does the crying child himself ever become anything else in this franchise? Well, as I've mentioned in the past few videos, I believe that he's likely a second spirit within Golden Freddy. Within the infamous survival logbook, we read that two spirits are manipulating it. One spirit being Cassidy, which we know from her name being solvable and on a tombstone only a few weeks after we got names of all of our MCI victims on tombstones, besides the unsolvable fifth, and the other spirit being the crying child, which we know due to the page with the Fredbear plush having Cassidy ask if he still talks to it, the logbook as a whole referencing the idea that these two souls are communicating through the same object somehow, which then aligned with the Fazbear Fright's epilogues, which we've touched upon previously, where we learnt about the Stitch Wraith, an animatronic that has two spirits within it when they meet, one of those spirits mentioning that they can't see, and the two end up discussing what they can remember, which directly references the survival logbook in itself, where we read the crying child state "I can't see," with Cassidy then asking a bunch of questions relating to his past, even outright asking, "What do you remember?" This theory then makes sense of stuff like the movie, for example, showcasing a drawing with the 5th Golden Freddy spirit where he's being seemingly placed over another spirit, as well as the final FNAF 4 minigame paralleling this theory with its imagery, by showing the crying child separate from Fredbear, who is with the other 4, their imagery representing the MCI, yet sharing the spotlight with him. Not only that, but within the Silver Eyes, it's implied that the "It's me" coming from Golden Freddy is referring to the fact that the main protagonist knew who he was, connecting to how the guard in FNAF 1 is Mike, the brother of one of the spirits within Golden Freddy. Speaking of FNAF 1, in the prequel to the game the week before, Ralph listens to a recording of the Bite of 83, called in-universe as the Big Bite, until the Bite of 87 comes along, where, quote, "people start shouting and screaming, the music plays on, the boy cries on, until, crunch, you hang up the phone, but you can still hear a child crying. You twist around in your seat and see crunch, which seemingly confirms that the crying child is indeed still around, appearing as Golden Freddy and agitated due to the recording of the bite being played. Not only all of that, but as we've mentioned before, possession can also lead to changes to the animatronic's appearance. This happens with the puppet to gain its tears, and Baby to gain her green eyes. I believe this also happens with Fredbear to gain his black accessories, and why it later becomes a simple Golden Freddy, which gets further hinted at within the Into the Pit game, where we see Golden Freddy surrounded by Fredbear posters, further referencing they're the same character, yet already having his black accessories, before the MCI even occurs that night, meaning it wasn't due to Cassidy's possession, and was likely due to an earlier possession that's specifically related to Fredbear's family diner via the imagery. This theory would also explain why Golden Freddy has been shown to specifically be different than the other animatronics since way back in FNAF 1, and why he's the most unstable and supernatural of them all. He has 2 souls within him instead of just 1. Although there's also quite a popular theory that causes me to want to take a quick moment to solidify that Cassidy and the Crying Child are separate spirits within Golden Freddy, and not just one spirit possessing it solo, and for some reason being taken out of the hospital to become part of the MCI, which we know due to a few reasons. As I mentioned earlier, we know that the Crying Child spirit is within the logbook, speaking with altered text, by him being asked does he still talk to you, right next to the Fredbear plush, as well as being told the party was for you, referencing the happiest day memories. But we also know that said questionnaire is the 5th MCI victim, revealed to be Cassidy, speaking through faded text, due to the "my name" hint from that very same questionnaire being on a gravestone just a few weeks after we got the FNAF 6 gravestone ending hiding the 5th MCI spirit's name. While the name Cassidy is found through the word search made with the altered text, some seeing this as meaning Cassidy is the altered user's name, therefore being the Crying Child's name instead, it should not be forgotten that the bottom of said word search specifically has altered asking Faded what is your name and who are you, to which Faded then puts my name hints throughout the book in order to give the answer to that question without altering any text to do so. None of the text in the word search is written by Faded, that's true, but the only way to actually get the name Cassidy is literally using the hints given by specifically Faded elsewhere in the book, said hints literally stating my name, to very easily and directly tell us that it's Faded's name we're getting with these coordinates and not Altered's. We also know that the Crying Child dies at the end of the week of his birthday, as heard by his heartbeat flatlining in the void the next day, as all of the minigames take place in the same week, implying that his death occurs at a hospital, which is then backed up by the main gameplay showcasing hospital equipment throughout, with no other explanation for this flatline at a hospital being actually implied within the cutscene itself, or even within any other FNAF media, besides it simply meaning that he's passing away here, especially with him fading away slowly and the gameplay night directly following this minigame having us fight against Nightmare, a representation of his death. This death also occurs 2 years before the MCI, which we've established most likely happens in 1985. The event where it's reported that specifically 5 children were lured away from their parties and went missing, meaning the 5th child must be a separate kid from the Crying Child, which is reiterated tenfold with every single continuity having the 5 kids being lured from their parties at Freddy's and killed together in the same event, never one kid being killed separately in another location by a third party. Then there's also the imagery of these minigames themselves that continuously and purposefully show the Crying Child being separate from the main 5 characters, whether it's with their plushies, the scene of the bite, or by him spectating their show, all mirroring how he's the outcast spirit that's completely separate from the other 5 children. who were all murdered together. This is shown most clearly with the final minigame like we mentioned before, showing the crying child and what's representing the MCI thought imagery being separate from each other, but Fredbear / Golden Freddy being the link between them. Those two specifically sharing the spotlight. Help Wanted 2 also represents them being separated by having us collect the memories of the MCI victims, as the Bonnie memory is specified to be a Jeremy memory, Charlie, and then an old Bonnie mask that's lost luggage, and seemingly represents the bite of 83, and therefore the crying child's death. The lights leading to this basement showing that it's a part of the memories and code as well, making it the 5 MCI, Charlie, and also the crying child. These two children are separate. The crying child is not Cassidy. But besides all of that, what else do we actually know about the crying child? Well, we don't ever learn the name of this kid within FNAF 4 itself, but within the survival logbook that we've been talking about constantly, we can actually figure it out by using the infamous Foxy grid, which contains a mysterious ABC on the top left, and numbers fading out as the grid continues past the 10th row, as if there's a solution to this new puzzle that only requires the first 10. With some puzzle solving that I've gone over in multiple videos, which since the name doesn't matter too much in the grand scheme of things, I won't waste 30 minutes going through it all again here. The name found was Dave, leading to the conclusion that the crying child's name is Dave Afton, and therefore it'll be the name that I'll be using to refer to him in the final timeline. We also know that Dave was likely 7 when he died at Fredbear's due to the Help Wanted Curse of Dreadbear DLC. That's all about Fall Fest 83, and features numerous references to FNAF 4, being where we see a cake having 7 candles. This also being the only other game besides, you guessed it, FNAF 4 to have an exclusive Halloween update. Not only that, but Stillwell Studios guessed a sketch teaser game that previously gave us additional evidence to FNAF 1 taking place in 1993, also had 3 others that were quite interesting. One of a gaming console called Channel F, which was discontinued in the year 1983. Another of an Australian TV show that I actually used to watch as a kid, Figaro Foe, all about a boy's phobia of literally everything, and then finally one of the crying child himself to connect it all together. Although the interesting thing about the first teaser is that the console first released in the year 1976. But why does this matter? Well, removing 7 years from the crying child's death day party in 1983 gives us his birth year that just happens to be 1976, the exact same lifespan of the console. Before you refute using these sketch games as evidence, they released a lot of these over time, but only ever had the ones I've been mentioning so far contained FNAF tags specifically. These just so happen to fit with the lore as well. We also know that the crying child has a sister, who we learn in the next game is named Elizabeth, as shown in the minigame with the girls' room in the Afton house. This then leads to the question, where is she at this point in time? While some believe this pigtail girl here to be Elizabeth, due to sharing similarities in hair color and having pigtails similar to Circus Baby, I disagree due to the fact that the pigtail girl intentionally scares the crying child further, and even states, "See you at the party," which implies that the next time she'll see him will be at the party in a couple days, and not at home like it would be if she were his brother. Not only that, but I also think there's actually a stronger option, this girl here with her toys. Take note of what toys this girl has: Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica. But what about Foxy? We know with the masks, the plushies, and the TV shows that Foxy was a public and merchandise character alongside the other 3. So where is the Foxy toy? Well, in the Afton house we see within the girl's room that there is a broken Foxy toy, completing this girl's toy set, which makes sense considering she and her toys are directly below this girl's bedroom with the final toy in the collection. Not only that, but the garden is also directly next to the Afton house, being the only other frame besides exiting the Afton house itself, to still show the walls of the house. This makes sense alongside sister location, showcasing that the walk to Fredbear's was simplified for the minigame, as in it's not right next to the house, meaning that the other frames not showing the walls are actually further from the house than we see them, which wouldn't affect the garden as it's shown to be directly alongside the house. While people will bring up that the hair color and eyes are different from Elizabeth, even though she carries over the same red bow, pink skirt, and blue shorts and or dress, it should be noted that no matter which one you think the sister is, her design was definitely changed from these minigames, which makes sense with how Circus Baby originally had brown hair, and the blue eyes turning green could also be a reference to that change. Elizabeth's design is also not the only design change between the two games, as seen with Mike as well. Also, as a side note about this girl, we've already spoken about the toy Chica without her beak over in FNAF 2, so just in case you forgot about that, don't worry, I didn't miss it. Sister aside, and that's about it for what we know about the Crying Child. But before we move on from the minigames, it should be noted that this game directly shows that Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were opened side by side in 1983, instead of one opening after the other in that same year, with numerous merchandise, such as the masks, plushies, and toys, as well as the television show Fredbear and Friends, showcasing Fredbear existing alongside the other four. This then getting doubled down with Help Wanted showcasing that Freddy's first opened in 1983, as well as Secret of the Mimic showing that the Freddy's franchise was planned since 1979 at maximum. There's also another big piece of evidence that I would say confirms the two are open at the same time, but I again need to save it for a later video, especially since it's a new discovery. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Although speaking of those character masks, and we can actually deduce what happens to all of the bullies after this event. The Foxy mask character is obviously Mike, which we learn the rest of his story throughout all of these games. The Bunny mask character then actually returns in a later game, Help Wanted 2, so we'll talk more about him then. The Freddy mask character is then actually revealed in the Into the Pit game, where within we as Oswald head into the house's attic, which can then cause a random Freddy mask to drop down. Oswald has no idea who the Freddy characters are before the game's events, meaning the mask likely belongs to his father. Considering this was the following game after we got a Bunny mask that seemingly hinted towards the character being the Bunny bully, it's possible this was included to hint that Oswald's dad is actually the Freddy bully. This would make sense considering this random conversation that happens in the original story. Quote, "I've just been doing some research. Jeff's Pizza, back before it was Jeff's Pizza, was some kind of arcade, wasn't it? Yeah, it was." Dad's voice sounded strange, nervous maybe. He was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "But it closed. Like everything else in this town," Oswald said. "Pretty much, yeah," Dad said, pulling up in front of the library. Maybe it was Oswald's imagination, but it seemed like his dad was relieved to get to their destination so he wouldn't have to answer any more questions, directly implying that his dad has bad memories of Fazbear Entertainment back in the 80s, and is seemingly hiding something from Oswald. Then finally, the Chica mask character is more of a mystery, but there's two main theories I have for his identity, though I can't decide. So in the replies of the pinned comment of this video, I'm leaving both options. Simply like whichever one you agree with the most for it to be included in the final timeline video. The first theory is that the Chica bully ends up becoming the phone dude, mainly due to the short story we talked about last video, What We Found, having Dwayne specifically be childhood friends with Hudson, the night guard of the location. So it's possible that this is hinting that the phone dude is someone who was childhood friends with Mike, and therefore possibly the Chica bully. The second theory is then that the Chica bully ends up becoming Jeremy Fitzgerald, as similarly, the FNAF movie has Jeremiah, aka Jeremy, be best friends with Mike for an unknown amount of time, possibly since childhood, working the same job together, which they do so in FNAF 2, and the fact that this would mean the bite of 87 happening to Jeremy due to an Afton gets paralleled with how the bite of 83 happened because of Jeremy and to an Afton. There's no real insanely strong option, but either of these help make for a neat little story addition, so go vote below. And really quickly, yes, I know, these minigames ask another question for us to answer. What was it that the Crying Child saw that seemingly holds him back and scares him from the animatronics? I do remember this, but unfortunately I'm going to have to save that for a following video, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the answer. So either way, now that we've talked about the minigames in their entirety, let's move on to the main Nightmare gameplay. We play within a child's bedroom facing off against the nightmarified versions of Freddy and his little Freddles, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and starting night 5, Golden Fredbear Freddy, as well as the even later Shadow Freddy, the creature feeding off the agony being generated by these nightmares, as again it never kills you like the others and just takes you back to the main menu. Although before we get into who, when, and why, I do want to confidently solidify that the gameplay we see in FNAF 4 is indeed a nightmare from our protagonist, and not the real world experiments that we see are happening in Sister Location. These two are separate. Why am I so sure? Well, first of all, in the lead up to the game itself, we got numerous teasers of these animatronics, which all contain the word nightmare in big bold bold letters, being what led us to call them the Nightmare animatronics in the first place. This name for them being reiterated within the game's extras menu, as well as the game mode literally being called Nightmare Mode. Also leading up to the game, the trailer itself specifically asks, "What have you brought home?" which is then reiterated with the game's description stating, "This time the terror has followed you home." Both of these quotes only work under the idea that these are nightmares, as being in experiments mean nothing was brought to the player, and would instead mean that the player was brought to them. The trailer also representing this idea with a 4 coming off a random red hue that has absolutely no reason to be there. But under this idea, it symbolizes someone asleep in those very nightmares before getting up and out of their bed. Not only that, but in the good old survivor logbook, we read a page that specifically asks the reader about their recent dreams and what they are, which is where we then see a literal drawing of a nightmare animatronic. And to add to that, the animatronic is specifically Nightmare Fredbear and or Nightmare, though more likely Fredbear due to its non-transparent body, which those two characters exclusively appear in the FNAF 4 Nightmares, and are not in the experiments as revealed within the Tales from the Pizzaplex short story Dinophobia, a story which showcases the experiments themselves, yet only features an illusioned version of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. There's no Fredbear or Nightmare mentioned at all, which makes sense considering the reasons that these nightmares occur in the first place that we'll get into in a moment. You may question what these experiment observations are actually meant to be then if that's truly the case, but I'll get into that properly in the Sister Location video itself, since it's linked to that game in every which way. But now that we know that the gameplay nights are actually nightmares, the obvious question that then arises is who is having them, why, and when? Well, this was quite a point of contention for a while, and still is. A lot of people saying that the nightmares are had by the crying child, the gameplay showing us what's happening every time he goes to sleep, while the minigames show us what happens once he's awake. Although that theory then crumbled when it was discovered that the radio static that can be occasionally heard during the nights is actually a reversed and distorted version of the first night's phone call from back in FNAF 1, meaning that the player must have heard it, therefore leading us to conclude that the nightmares are being experienced by Mike instead. We can then deduce that just like the phone call is a distorted replica of the FNAF 1 phone call, the nightmares are a distorted replica of FNAF 1 itself. This is why you'll notice the gameplay is extremely similar to the first games in a ton of different ways, such as the player having doors on their left and right, which only upon activating a light can you see the animatronics outside them. Freddy variants laughing every time they move, Freddy only progressing if you aren't looking directly at him. Bonnie and Chica coming down their respective hallways with 2 movements. Bonnie and Chica also groaning to the player when next to them, Chica heading right into the kitchen and beginning to bang things around once inside, Foxy running down the hallway to enter the room with the exact same sound effect, Foxy hiding before having to go through 5 different stages before he finally kills you, Foxy being out of order, which we know is the same for Nightmare Foxy due to his FNAF World loading screen stating so, also confirming that the nightmares take place after FNAF 1. Fredbear and his copy Nightmare outright teleporting, a secret animatronics jumpscare containing only a close-up of their face and a loud noise, all of their jumpscares sharing the same audio, Ralph's first night phone call as we just explained, a 2020-2020 mode available with the main 4, and of course, besides the agony creature latching onto them, the 5 characters present in the main 5 nights are the exact same 5 from FNAF 1. Although you'll notice that Golden Freddy isn't wearing his black accessories, and has reverted to his original Fredbear look and title, and this is because FNAF 1 isn't the only bag of memories within these nightmares, as proven most clearly with Fredbear's ginormous exaggerated mouth in his stomach, but also with rare chance Easter eggs showing us an IV drip, flowers, and pills by a bedside table. These nightmares are also mixed with the memories and grief of the crying child's death. This makes sense of why the height of the dreamer is a younger version of themselves, the room being the crying child's bedroom itself, albeit distorted into its current FNAF 1-esque look, and even having plushies in the room that the crying child also had. The hospital equipment then represents this idea further with how the 3 items represent the before, during, and after of the crying child's final day. The IV drip from a hospital representing what occurred directly after the bite, being sent to the hospital as they try to keep him alive. The flowers then representing the death itself, something you put on a grave. and then the pills representing the aftermath of his death, Mike's sleeping problems similar to the movies. Speaking of, the movies also directly reinforce this entire idea, with Mike directly taking the pills he leaves on his bedside table before having nightmares about his brother's death, waking up with a 6 AM alarm similar to FNAF 4's. These nightmares then get later hijacked and distorted by the supernatural shenanigans of his visits to Freddys, having the main 5 characters appear within, with the movie Nightmares OST even directly connecting to the FNAF 4 Nightmares ambience. Movie universe aside though, this theory got an earlier confirmation within the survival logbook, where, as we mentioned earlier, the reader, who we know from the first page is Mike, is asked to write about his recent dreams, which causes Mike to outright draw Nightmare Fredbear himself, someone we just established, even with the experiments, he could only see during FNAF 4 itself. So we can accurately conclude that Mike is having nightmares of his younger brother's death, that eventually get distorted with his memories of the supernatural occurrences he went through in FNAF 1. Easy. Let's call it a day and wrap it up from here, is what I wish I could say, as there's a whole other part of these nightmares that I have yet to mention, and for good reason. After beating each night, you're rewarded with a minigame called Fun with Plush Trap. Within this minigame, you fend off against a nightmare version of a Spring Bunny finger trap, according to the minigames, that's undeniably meant to resemble Springtrap appearance-wise, beating him to skip 2 hours of the main nightmares. Although after the first nights where Fun with Plush Trap has an effect, to have any effect on the extra modes, Nightmare, 2020, 2020, etc., you must instead be a new version of the minigame, Fun with Balloon Boy, where you now go against a nightmare version of Balloon Boy, the only real difference being of course the character, but also Balloon Boy's laughs. The interesting thing about this though is the fact that while yes, Fun with Balloon Boy replaces Plush Trap in FNAF 4's Halloween edition, which Scott explicitly stated is not canon, when people used that to discredit his inclusion in the base game as well, Scott clarified that quote, Nightmare BB was originally just for the bonus game, before I decided to make a separate Halloween edition. However, Nightmare BB fits into the story and can be considered canon. What? Why is Nightmare Balloon Boy able to be canon while Nightmare Mangle, Puppet, and the Jacko characters aren't? Well, I believe this is because Scott is telling us that the main Nightmare gameplay must be based on Mike's memories of his supernatural experiences at Freddy's, mainly due to it being the 12 AM to 6 AM portion specifically. Meanwhile, the side minigames, aka the interludes between his waking life and sleeping life, can be nightmares based on literally anything as long as it's something he's seen or currently seeing. This would explain why Balloon Boy can be part of the canon nightmares as something he's seen, as we've already theorized him to be the FNAF 2 guard, which this would confirm, especially since he hears his laughs, while the Puppet and Mangle, who were also in FNAF 2 and should also count, can't be canon, since they instead take over and replace the roles of the classics in the main gameplay, the Jacko characters specifically being the main problem with the Halloween version's canonicity, as they make no sense being dreamed up and also outright replace the classics. I believe that means whether it's Plush Trap, Balloon Boy, or even the other toys in that chair, it would still be considered canon as long as it doesn't replace the main nightmares, and replace anyone's pre-existing roles. Also as a side note, instead of just saying because it doesn't matter who is there, I theorized that Plush Trap's fill-in character canonically being Balloon Boy may possibly mean that Mike is actually afraid of Balloon Boy the most out of everyone, which corresponds to the movie universe where he gets continuously jump scared by a Balloon Boy figure, and always turns it away from him. Although, as I just mentioned, whoever is in the chair has to be someone Mike has seen before, just like everything else in the nightmares. So while Balloon Boy we can very easily say is from his theorized experience at the FNAF 2 location, what actually is Plush Trap? As I briefly mentioned earlier, in the minigames we actually see a Spring Bunny plush, the owner's dad calling it a finger trap toy, that shares a similar color to Plush Trap, causing almost everyone at this point to explain Plush Trap away as simply being a nightmare version of that toy. While the theory holds up and is what I also went with for the longest time, my main problem with it has always been the issues that surround the why. Why is Mike having entire nightmares about a plush from a decade ago, at minimum? that he himself never actually saw or interacted with in those minigames? Why did the future games show us what the in-universe Spring Bunny plush actually looks like, where it's absolutely nothing like Plush Trap and is coloured more accurately, almost as if the colours in the minigame isn't accurate, just like Spring Bunny himself isn't? These issues got me thinking of any alternative answers, which led me to take a closer look at Plush Trap himself. Immediately, anyone could deduce that he shares an identical colour palette with Springtrap, even being the only other animatronic at the time who has a darker patch on his stomach instead of a brighter patch, which even Spring Bunny himself has. Which begs the question, what if Plush Trap is instead the nightmare manifestation of Springtrap? Well, people have had this idea before, but dropped it quite quickly due to it confusing the timeline a lot, and the only evidence being their shared colour palette, and that's basically it, which is about as much evidence as the simpler, non-timeline complicating minigame plush alternative has anyways. Although, what if I told you that there's actually a lot more evidence that everyone has missed, and that I've actually been keeping from you up to this point in the video? Very simply, the FNAF 4 nightmares don't just share similarities with FNAF 1, they also share similarities with, and so are mixed with the memories of, FNAF 2 and FNAF 3 as well. Think about it, the player having an entry point on their left and right, but also having an entry point in the middle, one that's used primarily for checking on Foxy specifically. The player is also able to stall animatronics from entering the room using their flashlight, Bonnie only having his bare endoskeleton showing on his right hand. Chica has her jaw attached only by metal rods on the left and right, with nothing attached on the back or front. Foxy has a longer snout than his classic variation, with withering at the bottom of his torso. Golden Freddy can appear as a large version of just his head. A green Spring Bunny with a darker patch on his stomach and a trap nickname is a solo antagonist in his own mode, which can also be stalled by being stared at. And a quick side note, Plush Trap's tagline in FNAF World also directly states, because the world needed a plush version, hinting that he's indeed not meant to be a nightmare version of a plush, and instead a plush version of Springtrap. Every official character description also calling him a plush version of Springtrap 2. Balloon Boy is randomly missing his balloon sign and balloon. There's one long hallway connected to 4 rooms, which, as another side note, in FNAF Help Wanted, within the Fun With levels, the door used to open up, as seen by Game Theory and Markiplier, and can still be thrown through now, where you can actually see the area that connects both of the bedroom hallways in the FNAF 4 levels, resulting in this map of the FNAF 4 location, which pairs nicely with the FNAF 2 map, the bedroom being the office, the hallways/entrances being the vents, the Plush Trap hallway connected to the 4 rooms being the main hallway connected to the 4 party rooms, and the kitchen even being in a similar position. And last but certainly not least, all of their jump scares contain literally every game's jump scare audio at distorted speeds, starting with FNAF 3, listen for it specifically now, containing FNAF 2 in the background, most prominent in Plush Trap, Mr. Cupcake, and Nightmare Balloon Boy's jump scare audio specifically, which is slightly different, listen for it specifically now, and then FNAF 1 the whole time. Listen for it specifically now. So if the FNAF 4 nightmares are a giant mix of Mike's agonizing memories surrounding his brother's death, FNAF 1, FNAF 2, and FNAF 3, when do they actually occur? This is the main issue with concluding that Plush Trap is meant to be Springtrap, as it pushes the timeline all the way up. Although for the answer, we can actually look to the Fun With Plush Trap section yet again, but specifically take note of when it begins, before Night 2, as well as when it stops, before Night 6. But why take note of that? Well, heading back to FNAF 3, and when does Springtrap first appear? Night 2. When is Springtrap then defeated? Night 6. You see where I'm going with this? That's right, FNAF 3 and FNAF 4 take place in the exact same week. Before you start writing in the comments below or explaining the problems with this, just hear me out and let me finish. This theory would explain all the Springtrap connections to Plush Trap, the FNAF 3 jump scare audio being included, and specifically the first thing you hear in this game's jump scares. The fact this game is yet another time Mike encounters both the classics and toys in his mind, the 6th night of FNAF 3 funnily enough being called Nightmare, being the same night Plush Plushtrap suspiciously stops showing up in the FNAF 4 nightmares, and also a detail no one else has noticed within the trailer to this game itself. The text continuously turning from red into yellow, a direct mirror of the FNAF 3 trailer when the text continuously turns from yellow into red. Not only that, but it also explains the giant glaring issue with any theory that FNAF 4 takes place around FNAF 1, the survival logbook, which literally takes place during the week of FNAF 3, outright stating that the FNAF 4 nightmares are recent, almost as if they're happening simultaneously. And guess what? The night these nightmares are first mentioned in the logbook just happens to be night 2. The same night Springtrap appears in Fazbear's Fright, and the same night Plushtrap begins appearing in said nightmares, winning the nightmare also skipping you to 2 AM specifically instead of 1 AM like Balloon Boy's. Again connecting 2 to the character to put all of this together. This theory also explains why his nightmares are distorted mixes of memories, as throughout FNAF 3, literal agony is directly affecting Mike's mind itself. Then the alternative timelines also reiterate this, with both the FNAF movie and Fazbear's Fright's short story Room for One More directly having a guard of one of the game's locations have nightmares of animatronics the same week he's working there. Although even if all of this is indeed coming together, there's still a major issue with this theory that I'm betting you're ready to mention, and it's all to do with that damn clock. Every FNAF game to this point has made it very clear that it takes place from 12 AM to 6 AM, making it virtually impossible for any 2 games to take place simultaneously. Although, what if I told you something crazy? Something that you honestly won't believe until I give you more evidence. That this 6 AM right here is not real. You heard me right, this is fake. The one thing that has always bugged me about this game more than anything is the fact that for the first and only time through FNAF's entire history, we literally don't see the clock turn from 5 AM or 5:59 AM to 6 AM, and instead get a random variety of numbers all shuffling through, some literally impossible such as 65-62, before it eventually forces itself to become 6. This is the only time the win screen starts at 0000, the only time the numbers have to force themselves to become a 6, the only time the win screen doesn't specify that it's AM, meaning he could be waking up at 6 PM for his midnight shifts, and is the only time in the original story that the win screen does not include the tune of the Westminster Quarters. This win is intentionally different, as it's his mind telling him to wake up and turn his real alarm off. Think about it, if Mike is literally having nightmares surrounding the memories of his night shift specifically, what is stopping him waking up from his nightmares, aka winning against the monsters at 6 AM, also being a part of the nightmare? So putting all of this evidence together, I believe that for a while before the gameplay begins, maybe even since his brother's death in 1983, Mike starts using sleeping pills to help himself get to sleep, having nightmares about his brother, and judging from the movie, specifically the lead up to his death. Although after he started experiencing the supernatural for the first time in FNAF 2, the nightmares started to alter into his experiences, Balloon Boy being the first appearance as an interlude between his waking life and his lengthy nightmares, making sense of why he's able to have an effect on the nights before and after Plushtrap appears, as instead of Balloon Boy replacing Plushtrap, it was actually Plushtrap who replaced Balloon Boy. Then after FNAF 1, where he now knows his brother is within one of the animatronics, with It's Me screaming in his mind, it mixes his brother's death with his night shift job, explaining why it's specifically the classics he goes against, as one of them includes his brother, but also because the 5 characters were already linked to the crying child's life through the 5 plushies, being why only those 5 characters are allowed to appear in this memory of the crying child, and directly explaining why both Freddy and Foxy turn from plush versions of themselves into their nightmare versions, as those characters through the plushies connect to the crying child, unlike Balloon Boy, who has no connection to his brother and so stays in a separate interluding nightmare. Then after his first night of FNAF 3, the actual nightmares we see in the FNAF 4 gameplay finally begin, the night 1 taking from his night 1 at FNAF 3. After his second night of FNAF 3 where he finally meets Springtrap, he goes home to sleep, and his mind then replaces Balloon Boy with Plushtrap before his second night of FNAF 4, further explaining the what have you brought home description. After a week of FNAF 3, on night 6 he then tries to finally defeat Springtrap, causing the fire at Fazbear's Fright and Plushtrap to no longer appear in and affect his nightmares, similar to how the phantoms also no longer occur in his mind after the fire, even when he faces William again later later in FNAF 6. These nightmares then seemingly continue past this point until Mike eventually faces the literal manifestation of all of this agony, who even takes over everyone else's roles. Nightmare, the agony creature itself. After beating the agony of his past, both mentally and nightmare mentally, the nightmares then stop and we reach the canonical end of the gameplay, explaining why Night 8 aka 2020 mode isn't on any of the menus, and can only be glitched into. It's canonically not meant to happen. So all in all, we're able to not only solidify that Mike is indeed the FNAF 2 and 3 guards, but also finally place FNAF 4 in a solid place in the timeline, instead of it dangling forever in the some vague time after FNAF 1 abyss. Also, as a quick side note, it doesn't matter too much if you want to believe that the nightmares only start when the FNAF 4 gameplay itself starts, or you want to believe that the nightmares start after his brother's death and slowly distort more and more over the years, leading to the FNAF 4 gameplay during FNAF 3. Either way works. I just personally think Balloon Boy's inclusion is for us to conclude that these nightmares occur both before and after the main 5-6 nights, where it was Plush Trap instead, also explaining why he's able to affect all nights, aka already existed before his spot was taken, as well as how the movie shows us that before the nightmares in the movie itself, featuring the 5 invaders, Mike had already been having the same nightmares every night, but just off screen and before the movie's events. Therefore, the same might be happening in FNAF 4, where the nightmares were also occurring before the game's events. And I also just like it more from a storytelling perspective, that we're seeing the final stage of these nightmares and what all of this grief has built to, instead of the gameplay being the only stage, and it literally just starting as jam-packed as it is. Genuinely nothing breaks if you'd rather he only begins having his nightmares once FNAF 3 starts though. So it's up to you. Although now we finally place FNAF 4 in the timeline, we should mention what happens after Mike beats the agony within him, as beating the night then introduces us to the infamous locked box, with the text, "Perhaps some things are best left forgotten, for now." So what on earth was and is within this thing? Well, since this game, Scott has gone on record to state that the contents within the box have changed over the years, and by the time of FNAF's 10th anniversary, he officially stated,
"There is something in the box, but I never pursued it, and I don't know if I can find it again."
Confirming that there's basically no solidified answer to it anymore, as he himself doesn't know what should be in there anymore. This idea is reminiscent of his statement about it not too long after the game was released. Quote, "I released part 4. And somehow, no one, not a single person, found the pieces. The story remains completely hidden. I guess most people assume that I filled the game with random Easter eggs this time. I didn't. What's in the box? It's the pieces put together. But the bigger question is, would the community accept it that way? The fact that the pieces have remained elusive this time strikes me as incredible, and special. A fitting conclusion in some ways. And because of that, I've decided that maybe some things are best left forgotten forever. So while there's basically no real answer, while simultaneously every answer can be correct, I've done a lot of thinking on it and looked at almost every single theory about this thing. And I've come to my final conclusion about the box that I'm probably going to keep for good. One that I believe is satisfying but also brings in pieces of every other theory about said box too. I believe that the box was originally meant to be a memory box containing the Crying Child's items. In this context, all 5 of the plushies that we saw in the minigames. And had importance in the main game too. A memory box is an actual name for a box containing objects from loved ones to link to their past and basically bring back memories. And as we'll explore more in depth in the future videos, though should be obvious from this video and the FNAF movie alone, Mike has a lot of guilt for accidentally causing his brother's death. So after literally battling with said guilt throughout this game, beating agony itself, he finally encounters this box but states that maybe it's best to leave the box locked, to push aside his literal baggage, and to forget the memories and the guilt, to finally move on. Then just like the game, the nightmares containing the memories of the Crying Child and those same 5 animatronic characters finally end. This would explain the imagery of the box ending showcasing regretful grey text above the box that's in the spotlight, directly mirroring the previous cutscene showcasing Mike's regretful grey text above his brother and his 5 plushies all in a similar spotlight too. The imagery also referencing the teasers for the game, showcasing the top hats, aka items, of both Freddy and Fredbear in the spotlight, possibly furthering that all the plushies are within. This theory then also makes sense of the final page of the survival logbook, besides the nightly quizzes. Having a giant box with text that states, "Draw all of your most valued treasures in the space below. Whom would you give each object to if you had to give them up?" With an illustration of Foxy, who represents Mike, looking through it. The crying child's most valued treasures would of course be his 5 friends, the plushies. We then see similar imagery within the later game Help Wanted 2, where after resting the agony of the memories surrounding the MCI and Charlie, we then go to a box that can be opened to reveal a Bonnie mask that's likely related to the Bite of 83, again connecting an animatronic item about the crying child being in a box. This theory is then also hinted at with the recent Chica's secret party that we touched upon briefly in the last video, where we specifically read about a kid's bedroom that contains scattered toys and a single crying baby in the middle, which the player then picks up all of the toys and moves them into a toy box, this helping lead the player to the next passage that then mentions the FNAF 4 box itself, which is in the same sentence talking about a golden key, aka representing Golden Freddy, aka representing the crying child. This was then seemingly doubled down on in the second movie, where Vanessa pulls out a box that everyone immediately connected to the FNAF 4 box. This box specifically containing toys relating to an Afton child's past. This exact theory. Scott stating that the box is the pieces of the story put together right before referencing the Easter eggs we missed truly makes me believe that these 5 items would have helped us connect that the Foxy brother of the crying child is indeed the Mike we've been following since FNAF 1. Think about it, the Easter eggs he's referencing are likely the pulls from FNAF 1 to 3 themselves, including the phone guy's call, which was leading people to the wrong conclusions such as Dream Theory, or that Mike was the crying child, etc. But that should have instead made us aware that the player is simply Mike from FNAF 1 himself. Then after beating the final night, we would learn that Mike, the player, just happens to speak in grey text as well, and had been looking back on the memories and guilt surrounding the crying child and his death, allowing us to successfully conclude that Mike is actually the bully brother from the minigames, who also speaks with grey text, and that this game was giving him a proper origin story. The ending is literally all the puzzle pieces put together. 4 games, 1 story. It's very important to remember that at the time, the bully brother being Mike Schmidt from FNAF 1 was not the 100% agreed upon consensus that it currently is today. It was genuinely argued against for a long time, and the biggest FNAF theorist on the platform, Game Theory, didn't even believe it for years. So I truly think that had we come to the conclusion earlier, then Scott would have had the box ending confirm it to us by showing to us that Mike was reflecting on the memories of the crying child, and was indeed the Foxy bully. This theory also makes sense with pieces from other theories, such as the idea that the box represents the franchise and or the story as a whole, with FNAF 6 showcasing the game's map that some connected to the look of the box, this showing right as Henry talks all about memory being put to rest. Not only that, but there's also the theory that the box symbolically contained Happiest Day, because in FNAF World we specifically have pieces be representations of the FNAF 3 minigames, that are then all put together to unlock the clock ending, and allow the spirit to rest similar to Happiest Day. All of which we established in the FNAF 3 video is directly associated with memories had by specifically the crying child, which then within the files of FNAF World, we actually see that the box is opened up. While Mike has left the crying child's memories to rest, someone else is using them. This all then explains the one part I haven't mentioned yet. What does the "for now" part of the ending actually mean if Mike is letting go of his guilt here for good? Well, I believe this to actually be referring to the fact that while Mike has dealt with his guilt and doesn't need to reopen the memory box himself, the crying child still needs those very memories to allow him and the others, who would again be represented by the plushies, to later rest in Happiest Day, which is why it's symbolically opened in FNAF World, despite us never seeing so in the game. So in conclusion, the box is a memory box that's filled with the crying child's plushies, and that's locked for good reason. Like he states, Mike is moving past the memories and the guilt of causing his brother's death. Then Charlie symbolically opens that box and brings his memories together to help give his plushie friends, now literal with the MCI, their happiest day. Boom. I honestly believe that this theory brings all the evidence and pieces of a ton of other theories about it all into one final satisfying conclusion. While it's impossible to know whether this was at one point Scott's actual intent, it's a fitting conclusion that I will happily leave as my final statement on the box, that we all now, just like Scott advised many years ago, need to leave forgotten. forever. So after all of that, we can solidify for my final timeline that besides what we're directly told / shown, the Fredbear plush isn't being carried around by the crying child and is actually haunted by agony, caused from his brother's constant bullying and what he saw. The final speaker in the minigames is William Afton pretending to be the plush. The crying child possesses Golden Freddy with Cassidy, the crying child's name is Dave, Elizabeth appears as the toy girl, being the owner of the girl's room, that Fredbear and Freddys were opened simultaneously in 1983, that all of the bullies get their stories expanded upon later in the timeline, that the gameplay in FNAF 4 is indeed nightmares and not experiments, that those nightmares are had by Mike, that Mike's nightmares are then based on the memories of FNAF 1 to 3 mixed with the memories of the crying child and his death, that Mike is likely afraid of Balloon Boy the most, and that while the box doesn't have any solidified answer anymore, it was originally meant to be a memory box containing the crying child's 5 plushies, representing his memories, that Mike is trying to move on from, and that's later reopened for Happiest Day. So with every aspect of FNAF 4 finally answered, we can now move on to FNAF's sister location to try and solve everything within it, coming next month. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. A big shout out to all of my channel members, become one today. Please be respectful to everyone when discussing what are simply theories, and I really hope you all enjoyed and have a great day / night. Bye!